Hey everyone, welcome back to Capital Connection. I'm Conan Smith. I'm your host with the Michigan Environmental Council, and again, so excited to come talk with you about the critical environmental issues facing the state of Michigan, the innovation that's happening in the environmental community. And today we're joined by some leaders from one of our member organizations, Legacy Land Conservancy. Legacy has been a member of MEC for many years, helping guide our work on land conservation, land protection, anti-urban sprawl policy. And most recently, Diana Kern, the head honcho over at Legacy, very generously joined an advisory committee for us, helping us create a planned giving program. Diana, you've been not just an amazing member, but a great mentor and leader for us. Thank you so much, and welcome to you to our webinar. Can't wait to chat today.
Thank you.
We're also joined by two of your key staffers, Susan LaCroix. Susan, welcome, and Clint McGill. You all have been doing really extraordinary work in not just in the Washtenaw County area where I live and where I first got to know Legacy, but across a tri-county area that includes some really interesting ecosystems. And one of the things that I think is most interesting about the work that you do is you work in an environment that is really a microcosm of the state of Michigan, right? We have a strong urban center, a medium strength urban center, a weak urban center. We have lots of rural farmland. We have abundant natural spaces that have been protected through the Natural Resources Trust Fund or through state parks and forest lands. Everything that Michigan has, your service area footprint has. And so we learn so much about how to do this right through the work that you do across a variety of community types. Super excited to talk to you all today about how your work is integrating with climate change. That is an area that is oft overlooked in the land conservancy dialogues. We think about you all as being protectors of land, but there are reasons for protecting that land that are about protecting our environment. And of course, the quality of our lakes and streams that is protected through land conservation, those critical habitats are protected through land conservation, but also, and this is going to be the subject that we talk about today, our climate can and is protected through the good work that land conservancies do. So why don't we kick off, Diana, with you sharing just a little bit about Legacy and your background.
Sure. Yeah, I'm going to make this part fast because I really want to leave time for Susan and Clint to talk about the important stuff around climate. But just for those people listening today and joining us, we're a 51-year-old nonprofit land trust. We're accredited land trust, so we're accredited by the Land Trust Accreditation Commission. And you see our service area up here. We call it the greater Jackson, Washtenaw, Lenawee County area. We certainly consult beyond that. We conserve land basically with four main tools. It's acquisition of new preserves, acquisition of conservation easements, and then we do easement stewardship and preserve stewardship. So preserves are legacy-owned properties that are open to the public, and those are great places for people to interact with nature. We conduct things like prescribed burns, we do invasive species removal, and we try our best to steward the lands that are under our protection. And then conservation easements are privately owned, but Legacy has a conservation agreement, which is a legal document with the landowner that restricts use to make sure that the property is protected under those conservation values that were established. And then we monitor every year. We go out and visit those easements every year to make sure that those conservation values are upheld. And the main thing we also do is work with landowners, private landowners, to provide information and possible funding if they're interested in doing restoration or management of their property. You're going to hear Susan and Clint maybe, or you'll see on slides, reference to what's called the Emerald Arc, which is a green arc that arches out all over the Detroit metro area. It provides recreation and green infrastructure to our growing area population of greater Metro Detroit. And this arc was first realized during the Great Depression. And you can see that some of our service area just fits firmly within that area and all the waterways and tributaries. And so this vision for the greater Southeast Michigan region is what sort of drove our mission and the founding of Legacy, again, 50 years ago when it was still called Washtenaw Land Conservancy. And this vision of the ARC and all the things that we're doing to try to protect habitat and then also deal with our climate changing is all related to this this area. So at that point, I'll turn it back to you, Conan, so we can get into the meat of the good information.
Yeah, Susan, Clint, will you take a minute and just introduce yourselves and a little bit of your background to the crew here and talk a little bit about the work you do at Legacy?
Yes. Hi, everyone. Susan LaCroix. I'm the land protection manager at Legacy Land Conservancy. I've been with Legacy for about 3.5 years. And prior to working here, I worked in similar positions at 3 other land trusts around the country. And I'm very happy to be back home protecting the Great Lakes. I know this is a critical area for climate change, and we have one of the best freshwater resources in the world. So it's an honor to be able to work and share our work with you all. And as the land protection manager, I focus mostly on new acquisitions. So I work with our preserve stewardship manager on identifying and accepting donations or purchasing new preserves. And we also work, as Diana said, on new conservation easements with landowners. And that process can be quite lengthy. We don't need to get into the weeds of it now, but in general, those projects can take anywhere from 11 months to some have taken over 10 years.
Yeah, I know that can be a long process working with landowners to get something in permanent protection. How about you, Clint?
Yeah, so my name's Clint McGill. I'm the easement stewardship coordinator here at Legacy. I'm a Hoosier by birth. Just moved up here about a year ago, so almost a full year with Legacy at this point. But once Susan and the landowners get the land protected with a conservation easement, it's my job to steward that land and make sure that those conservation values and all the reasons that land was protected in the first place are preserved forever.
Can you guys talk a little bit about the folks you partner with? You are responsible for the preservation of private lands that have been ceded to this, but there is just an enormous amount of engagement from the public and the private sector in this effort. And I got to imagine you're working with all sorts of folks. Like, are you working with the drain commissioners? Are you working with the federal government? Like, tell us a little bit about those partnerships.
Yeah, we certainly couldn't do this work without the partnerships that we have. We're really lucky to live in an area where we have unique funding sources for partnerships as well. The city of Ann Arbor, Washtenaw County, and 5 or 6 townships now have millages to fund conservation easements and preserves. So we're very lucky to have that additional funding that can support our work and be partners in this. We also do apply for a lot of federal grants. The NRC, Natural Resource Conservation Service, through the U.S. Department of Agriculture, has grants to protect farmland. EGLE, the Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy of Michigan, they get water quality grants through the Clean Water Act. And we've also been working with other partners to leverage funding for different critical species around the state and certain wetland types. So yeah, we partner a lot with Washtenaw County. We partner with different townships, Ducks Unlimited, the city of Ann Arbor, EGLE. We have quite a wide variety of different partners, and then some other private ones like the Huron River Watershed Council and the River Raisin Watershed Council as well.
So Diana, your work has been such a import to me in my career. I started at the Environmental Council as a land use person and working on anti-sprawl measures. One of the things that I think we forget about is that development pressure is incessant in our region. And you all play a real role in making sure that critical habitats are protected and provide a buffer sometimes to that kind of pressure. Can you talk a little bit about this pattern of growth that we're seeing and the role you all are playing?
Yeah, and that pressure increased during COVID. People were wanting to get out of, really habitated cities, dense spaces. And that creates problems because if everyone's going out and building their own huge house on a 5-acre piece of land and clearing all the trees and planting grass, it just adds to all the issues that we have. And that pressure continues.
So talk a little bit now about climate change. So like I said, we think of this work as being habitat oriented, but you are now seeing the impacts of the lands that you preserve on these systemic effects that change our climate. What are you learning there, Susan, Clint, and how are you engaging in the climate change conversation as land preservationists?
Yeah, so Legacy's work with land protection helps to mitigate climate change in a number of different ways. It obviously helps prevent greenhouse gas emissions that would result from development. So converting land from natural areas or lands used for agricultural uses to a more built up environment with a lot of great infrastructure. But another avenue of climate change mitigation also results from simply preserving our natural lands and the ecosystem services that they provide. So forests, prairies, farmlands, other natural habitats absorb about 15% of the country's carbon dioxide emissions. And privately owned lands make up about 60% of the total land in the US, but only 3% of that is protected for conservation. So when land trusts work to protect land through tools like conservation easements and preserves and other lands, that land is protected forever, and the ecosystem services that land provides, stuff like flood mitigation, water filtration, groundwater recharge, all of which help to mitigate climate change in their own ways, those are also protected forever.
Are you doing quantification of your impacts across your properties right now? Is that robust or is it nascent? How are you looking at that?
It's something we've gotten into over the last couple years. When we do a conservation easement, we have to do basically a baseline report of what the property looked like to document what conservation values we're protecting. And we've started putting into those baselines the amount of carbon that's already stored on the property and the amount that will likely be sequestered each year into the future. We are currently using the Nature Conservancy's climate resiliency tool to get that data, but we have a few local partners working with the University of Michigan who are trying to find ways to break that out more into different habitat types to provide a more localized and specialized amount that might be a little more accurate. But this climate resiliency tool with the Nature Conservancy has been great, just kind of getting some of this work off the ground to try to document what might be going on these properties.
So carbon sequestration, the effects of trees on helping us adapt to carbon in the atmosphere and put more of the good stuff that we like to breathe out in it. Those are some of the innate and maybe more obvious impacts of land preservation. But you are also helping protect us from those kinds of impacts at the community level as well. Can you talk a little bit about how major impacts like storm events that we are going to be facing in the future are mitigated by good land use practices and preservation activities that surround the places that we live? Yeah,
so one way that land protection helps to deal with all of those effects of climate change that are coming down the pipe, in addition to the carbon sequestration and storage benefits that you mentioned, is through preserving these farms, these wetlands, these other natural areas that naturally absorb and retain and just slow the flow of water from these extreme storms that have become more unpredictable as a result of climate change. They help to filter all of that water and protect those habitats that are destroyed by climate change, either directly through development or indirectly through that flooding, that degradation caused by the gradual warming of temperatures. and protects that land, that habitat that's essential for the survival of all of our local fauna, and really important for the well-being of all the systems and infrastructure that we in our communities rely on as well. So one way to just dive into this really briefly on the ground, how this works. There are a lot of different factors that come into consideration when you think about how like this connection between land and water and the effects of climate change. Soil is a really useful lens, so I'll use that today. So healthy soils are a lot more than just dirt and are really diverse ecosystems in their own right, just on a much smaller scale than we usually think of. So healthy soils, generally speaking, should be about 50% just pore space, that is air or water, depending on weather conditions. Then 45% is mineral solids, sand, silt, clay, that kind of thing. And then just 5% of that is organic matter and living biota. And it's that living matter, the organic stuff and all those pore spaces, that's the important stuff that provides those ecosystem benefits to our communities. So the pore spaces allow water to slowly infiltrate into the ground, like you see in that slide there, which helps with flooding, and it makes it easier for plants to actually access and uptake that water. It's helpful to think of soil like a house. All the interesting stuff is happening in the empty spaces between the walls there. And then the organic matter, stuff like roots, leaf litter, other old plant debris, holds all of that stuff together as an aggregate and prevents erosion. Water erosion during those big storms or during droughts, it prevents erosion from the wind. And unfortunately, when that land is developed or farmed in a way that isn't really sustainable, it's those two aspects of the soil that are degraded first. So that leads to the compacted soils like you see there, and that water just runs off into our waterways, carrying it with it, nutrients, chemicals, minerals, all of which can wreak a lot of havoc on our ecosystems and our built environment.
Yeah, certainly. I think about like one of the challenges, of course, our stormwater systems and the stormwater treatment systems at the end, right? When we're not able to see the water infiltrate and it comes down through those systems, not only are they not built for that capacity of water, but also there's, like you said, Clint, there's a bunch of stuff that comes in that water that we don't want flowing back into our drinking water systems. So it becomes really important aspect of preserving the health and vibrancy of our cities as well, just to protect these natural features all around us. Susan, I want to jump a little bit into the field. Can you talk a little bit about the Shatter Preserve and some of your work there?
Yeah, I'll let Clint chat about the Shatter Preserve, and I'll talk about the Arnold Preserve after.
Oh, great. Okay, I've got these backwards. All right.
More Clint. Yeah, the Shatter Preserve, it's a really good example of all the benefits that land protection can provide as it relates to climate change. Shatter is home to about 25 acres of a mature woodland, has various wetlands dotted throughout in a big wetland complex along one boundary. And a few years ago, a University of Michigan master's student, Zane Almquist, did some work and estimated that Shatter has approximately 2,950 metric tons of CO2 equivalent stored in its above ground biomass, so mostly trees, woody vegetation. And just for context, that's equivalent to the annual carbon dioxide emissions from gasoline of about 752 Americans, or the annual electrical emissions of about 1,000 Americans. So if a fire were to claim all of those trees on the preserve, that's how much CO2 would be released into the atmosphere. And similarly, if that land was not protected and was instead clear cut and converted to a mall or a housing development or something, a similar level of carbon dioxide would be released into the atmosphere. We'd lose habitat and would lose all of the other ecosystem services that Shatter currently provides and will continue to provide well into the future because it's protected.
So Clint, how big is the Shatter Preserve and where is it?
It is 25 acres and Susan or Diana, could you help me with the location? I'm having
Yeah,
trouble.
it's in Salem Township.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks. I forget that you've only been in the state for a year. So I'm sorry to throw a geography question.
Yeah, we're still telling Clint. He's like, "Where's that?" You know?
Yeah, still rely on Google Maps heavily.
Yeah, it's a beautiful, beautiful preserve, by the way. It's absolutely
Yes.
gorgeous.
So one of the sort of undervalued, I think, ecosystems in Michigan are these fens that are very common in Southeast Michigan. They're hidden in beautiful spots, and they serve such an important ecological function. But we sort of we think swamps and lakes, but a fen is a very special place, right? So Susan, tell us a little bit about Arnold and what you're doing there and how you see that playing a role in this climate challenge as well.
Yes, we recently officially protected the Arnold Fen. It's located in Jackson County. It's privately owned, so you'll have to enjoy it through these photographs. And the landowners have stewarded this land for many years. It's been in their family for a while. Their family has farmed adjacent land, but they've pretty much left this unique natural feature untouched. And fens, as Conan said, are super rare wetland features and ecosystems, and they are surprisingly common around the southern Michigan area. So we worked with the landowners to put a conservation easement on the property so that the fen will remain natural and basically untouched by humans, other than some pretty passive recreation by the landowners. And this fen is a remnant ecosystem, so it's been around for a while. It's not restored, and that's even more important because it's had all these years to grow and develop and put roots into the soil. Here you can see one of the ponds on the property with deep caverns that go underground. And this property currently stores about 1,420 megatons of carbon. And over the next 40 years, will store another 395 megatons of carbon, which is a lot.
Yeah, what's really interesting about both these places is you're not talking about, massive amounts of land, right? 25 acres, 90 acres. These are sites that are achievable to preserve and still have massive impact on the communities around them. It's really impressive.
Yeah, and I also want to talk briefly about the species on the property too. Properties like this with unique topography and adjacency to other protected land are critically important for protecting the global biodiversity, which is also being hit hard by climate change. And so when we have these unique ecosystems, the species in the ecosystems are able to move to different parts of the ecosystem depending on how climate change has affected their life. So when we build these larger connected pieces of conserved property that have certain features, we're also able to help with the biodiversity loss.
My staff and I had an opportunity earlier this year to go on a hike with Mike Penskar, who was a former ecologist with the Michigan Natural Features Inventory, and his wife Maureen Martin. And they took us into a publicly accessible fen in Washtenaw County. And like you say, the biodiversity in there is just stunning. The insects that are flying around, the different types of species from low grasses to big trees to poison sumac, which we got intimate with. It's quite a space, and as you said, they're pretty rare globally. So bless you all for protecting another one of these. And for those in the audience, if you have a chance to go visit, especially with a biologist or an ecologist, you'll see some really beautiful spaces, and it'll touch your heart and remind you the value of this work. Susan, Clint, a lot of your day-to-day is just talking to landowners, communicating with them about the value of preservation. When you think about climate change, how are those conversations changing? When I first started in this work, we just talked about conservation, right? Let's protect this land for the future because I love it. It's beautiful open space and I want it to stay open space forever. I imagine that's still a pretty big driving motivation for landowners. But do you see some of this climate change conversation creeping in?
It's starting to a little bit. It varies on the landowners. Like Susan said, we're starting to incorporate that into our baselines for the properties to understand like sort of a baseline value of the climate benefits it provides. But beyond that, I think we usually let the landowners drive any climate-driven conversations.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Clint, I would just say it's about education. Like
Yeah.
some of the numbers we're providing today, people don't necessarily think about those day to day. So if we can do our part when we're talking to landowners about conservation easements or even a potential conservation easement, and they hear a number about sequestration or carbon storage, or what will happen if you don't cut all these trees down to help the environment and the ecosystems, that's impactful. People talk about climate resiliency and climate change now. They really do. So it's more about us taking the opportunity to educate.
So Diana, are you saying that people's sort of point of entry is still around traditional conservation, but when you introduce them to these climate impacts, they sense an opportunity to have a real tangible impact themselves?
Yeah, it's because if you're not a day-to-day, people are not scientists, they don't understand all this, and they don't really understand. They really, this much carbon will be, stored on my property if I don't do, it doesn't get turned into something. Yes. So it's really about just giving them that information, which I think is inspirational for many, many people.
So there's a question or a point in the chat that I think is worth asking you about, Diana, because it speaks to the changing role of nature conservancies and land conservancies in our space. A lot of what we've done over the years is protect pristine environments that are sometimes at a distance from our urban centers. But there are now sort of emerging environmental justice implications to our historic pattern of land preservation. Are you all thinking differently about where you target land preservation, incorporating some of those questions of access for urban residents and poor residents of communities?
Absolutely. I'm gonna let Susan talk about that, but I'll just say this real quickly, that it is absolutely important. And we as a nonprofit have the opportunity to be the key partner in that. Because in some of the municipalities that have millages, they're not looking at smaller spaces. We're the nonprofit. So let me let you address that, Susan, because we're doing a lot in that space.
Yeah, so we have a JEDI Council who talks about how to incorporate justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion more into our work. And some of the things that we're working on but haven't yet been implemented include doing more of a community conservation project where we would go into communities that don't have as great of access to green areas and working with them to see what type of property they might like to see conserved and how they might want to use it. Another option we're looking at is called Buy, Protect, Sell. That would allow new and beginning farmers, especially historically underserved demographics of farmers, to have access to land. Land is quite expensive. And if you're a new and beginning farmer, land can be one of the biggest hurdles to get over to get into the field. So we're implementing we're looking into implementing some changes to how we conserve land so that we could maybe take smaller or bigger farms and break them into smaller farms so they're more affordable and have them already be conserved under a conservation easement. So the development pressure is removed from it. And then that land could be more affordable for new and beginning farmers. And I know breaking up larger chunks of land into smaller land sounds a little counterintuitive to what traditionally land trusts have done in the past, but you know, if we're really talking about providing access to land for more people, this is one of the tools that have been proven to allow that.
We're working right now with funding from DTE to map access opportunities to native ecosystems around the city of Detroit and in the more urban metro area. Love to work with you guys in the future on expanding that work and understanding where we really need to do more of this preservation work from a justice standpoint. My last question to y'all. So we've talked about how your work to protect lands impacts climate change. I'd like to flip that on its head for a second. Climate change is happening, right? And even over my lifetime, I've seen the pattern of birch trees like move away from where I live today to further and further north. How do you see climate change impacting the properties that you own? And what are some of the struggles that you have as we face this?
Yeah, that's a great question. We don't have our preserve manager on the call who would maybe be able to talk a little bit more specifically about Legacy's properties, but we've definitely seen an increase in invasive species on our easements and also our preserves. And do you want to add anything, Clint or Diana?
Yeah, I'm just going to say, you know, yes, invasive species are a problem. It's a never-ending stewardship issue for most land trusts and most land conservancies. The changing patterns that we have, you know, you'll depending on what happens in the spring, depending on what happens in the winters, you're seeing those changes. If you're paying attention to any of the reports that are put out by Audubon Society, you're seeing what's happening with the changes in birds and our pollinators and the destruction of pollinator habitat. I mean, we could talk about this for hours and hours, but yes, we absolutely do see the impacts. We will continue. Some of those impacts are slow and some are a little bit more evident or aggressive. And for people like land trusts like us, it's about trying to keep your eye on the land, see how healthy the land is doing, and do what we can, which in most cases is burns, prairie remediation, you know, putting in more prairies, restoring prairies, watching the health of things, looking for horrible things like oak wilt and making sure you remediate that right away so you're not losing old oak growth forests. It's a never-ending process, but we do see it. So.
I would say one of the takeaways for all of us on the webinar has to be that if there are places that we have worked so hard to protect and preserve because we love them, you know, for their beauty and for what they do for our spirits, we also have to be fully engaged in this fight against climate change, because climate change will change those places just as sure as development would have. And so let's be on guard. And thank you so much to Legacy Land Conservancy. Clint, Susan, Diana, your work is amazing. And I'm so grateful that you took some time to share with us today about everything you've been doing. Thank you for being here.
It was our honor. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity.
So all of you out in the audience, we've got a couple fun webinars coming up, post-election policy stuff. We're having an event in Ann Arbor. So if on November 30th, you want to talk about the pretty significant changes in political dynamics in the state capitol, come join us at Of Rice and Men. I always struggle to get that out, in downtown Ann Arbor on the 30th. Our next webinar, building off of this one, the My Healthy Climate Plan, adopted by the governor's office, has real opportunity for investment and implementation in the coming legislature. We'll talk with Charlotte Jameson about that. All of you, thanks for being with us today. Appreciate the wisdom from Legacy Land Conservancy and the attention from all of you out in the audience. We'll see you next time on the next version of Capital Connection. Have a great weekend.